Welcome to the Strong, Single and Human podcast, a real look at single parenting, how to navigate the ups and downs of life with kids on your own while keeping sane. We cover all manner of subjects from domestic violence, dealing with childhood trauma, through to fussy eaters and how to help your kids become resilient. I'm your host, Claire Martin. Welcome. This week's guest has experience in parenting 3 children with anxiety and OCD. Stacy Quick has had OCD as a child and has been a licensed professional counsellor for the last 10 years who specialises in the treatment of OCD at her clinic. This is the Strong, Single and Human podcast. Stacy Quick, welcome to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. Look, giving a brief synopsis about the fact that you've parented 3 kids with anxiety and OCD, and you also have OCD yourself, right? But tell us a little bit about your journey to getting diagnosed and then how you went on to counsel people on it.
Yeah, no, it's a long story. I'm now in my 40s, and it started around age 6 for me.
Wow.
Yeah. I didn't know that's what it was because this would have been the 80s. And although that's not that long ago, it really is.
But it is. It is with everything 80s. We didn't really have the internet in the 80s.
Yeah, which is crazy.
I know.
Was thinking about
no
that.
Facey, no Insta, none of that malarkey. God, life was so simple then.
It was. But, and I get people who complain about the lack of information on OCD, and I kind of laugh, although I agree to a certain extent. I do agree that there could be a lot more accurate information out there, but then the little 6-year-old me who grew up in the 80s and then the 90s as a teenager says, oh my goodness, the wealth of information is so much more today than it ever was. But the point, I guess, is that there's a lot of misinformation out there today. So, yeah, it's sort of a double-edged sword.
Did you get diagnosed at 6?
No. I actually, I found out that I had OCD at 15, but my mom knew something was wrong from a very young age.
So how did OCD manifest within you then? Because and maybe we should take a step back from all of that, right, and go, what is OCD, right? Because my picture and view of OCD, and I do not know anyone with it apart from yourself, is that OCD is where people wash their hands constantly, or and things like that, right?
Which this is going to be
I'm sure is. Yeah, well, and I'm sure it's
so
not
much
right.
more.
Exactly.
Yeah. So much more. Yeah.
So how did it how was it manifesting in you? And
yeah, no. So obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, is really obsessions are unwanted, intrusive thoughts, images, urges, or feelings, and that they trigger intense feelings that are distressing and intense anxiety, basically. And they can take on anything you can think of, right? And then the second part of having a diagnosis of OCD is compulsions, right? You have to have both obsessions and compulsions, and they have to interfere with your life in a pretty impactful way. So if you're spending more than 1 hour a day in obsessive thinking or compulsions, then you can meet criteria for this. And then there are some other criteria as well. But compulsions are really any type of behavior mentally or outwardly that somebody might do to reduce that distress or that anxiety. And so you're like many people would think the washing, right? That's one of the most well known, and it's a great example because that can be part of it. And so, washing would be the compulsion in that case. But really, contamination themed OCD is pretty. Um, it's common, but there's so many other different themes as well.
So it could be that you, and I'm just saying, putting this out there, but okay, I'm going to go, could it be that you would check the locks on your doors, right, your front and back doors, but you'd have to check it like 5 times before you left the house or whatever? That's like a compulsion that you would have to do something like that. Or switch the light switches on and off 3 times.
Yeah, those are great examples. Those are perfect examples of compulsions, of outward compulsions. There are inward ones too, but we'll touch on that too. But some mental compulsions.
Stirring your tea the right way, is that another one?
It could be anything. It could be anything.
Wow.
I'll tell you. Well, so for me, I had developed this intense fear around gasoline when I was very young. Like I'm not like gasoline that you put in cars.
Yeah, like we would call it petrol over here, but yeah, gasoline. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wondered. I was like, I wonder if it's a different word.
No, that's okay. Yeah, but that's quite a healthy fear. Because it can set you on fire and kill you, right? So
it can. I took it a little far though. So yeah. So that's the other piece, right? So I want to also say a couple things. OCD is known as the doubting disease or the doubting disorder. At its root is doubt and uncertainty. That's really, really important because it can take on any theme. But if you think of it as a disorder of doubt, so people doubt their memories, they doubt what they've touched. That's why they go back and recheck because they can't be sure that they've done it. It really is this, but what if, or just in case. So that's the first important thing. And then important to recognize that it's always excessive. And when we talk about obsessions in this disorder, it is not things that are enjoyable to the person. So it causes a great deal of suffering and a great deal of time is taken up in these obsessions and compulsions.
Yeah, because you've got to do them, or would I be right in saying you've got to do them or something bad would happen? Or
sometimes that's the thought, right? That if I don't do this, something bad will happen. Right. Sometimes it's just this feeling. Sometimes it's something very specific. It really is dependent on the person. Like I said, it can kind of take on anything. And it can be very complex, and it can be something that you wouldn't readily see in a child necessarily, unless you really knew what you were looking for.
So your mum thought something's going on here with yourself. And like when you say you had like an issue with gasoline, right? Petrol. What was it? Can you talk about that?
So, yeah, for sure. My mom, she just knew something was off, right? And I'll tell you why. But this wasn't my first OCD fear looking back, but it was one of the more persistent ones. And so my dad worked in like a factory, and so he would often come home with like oil on his work clothes. And my dad was very much very clean, and that was very important. And so he would immediately change his clothing and shower and everything, and just, I don't know. So I developed this idea that it was deadly.
Oh, wow. Okay. Which was sort of fair enough with how your dad would come home and clean it all off. And, I could understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. And so did this affect you getting in cars and...
Well, what I would do is I would trace wherever he touched. So he would come home And if he touched a door handle,
Yeah.
or if he touched a glass, or if he touched a couch, then I would just sort of mentally note that it was now dirty. And I would try to do something to make it undirty. And I wasn't so much afraid that I would get sick. It was always somebody I loved would die. Like I really
Wow.
thought that just by touching gas and that they would then ingest it and die. And so the biggest memory that sticks out is my mom had been doing laundry in our living room, and she left the room, and I had gotten it in my head that something had contaminated the clothes and that they were all dirty, and I knew I couldn't just go put them back in the hamper because she would know. So, I'm young and probably not the brightest, but I stole like this big old pile of towels and I went and hid them in a closet, thinking that I was protecting them from like gas, like that they would have, had they used the towels, they could have ingested it and died. And of course that didn't work. She promptly knew that I had done something.
But okay, so then that's quite a terrifying thought for you to have as a child, that, because...
And I couldn't explain it. It wasn't something I could tell them. So then it was even weirder. It was like, that's Stacy and she's doing these weird things. Yeah. But I don't know that I could tell them why.
And because in a way, we've all been through that with the pandemic, right? Because and experienced somehow, and I'm not saying it's the same as what you've experienced, but, where you'd go shopping or whatever and you'd have a mask on and you would be very concerned about touching things and going in certain places and sort of get to a certain level, especially here in Melbourne, you get to a certain level of a paranoia, right? Because, we were locked in our houses, we couldn't go out, you didn't know who you were walking down the street with, who may have it or might not have it or what. So it's just it was horrendous, really, wandering around in that environment. But you had that because your thought processes were dealing with it as a child till the age of 15. Then what happened?
What's interesting is I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what it was though. And so I didn't really tell. I knew enough to know that it's kind of goofy and I shouldn't talk about it. And so I tried to hide it. But so fast forward, and this happened with numerous things, not just gas, but that is one that sticks out. We were watching a news show, and there was a spotlight on a boy who had OCD, and that's how my mom seen the special. Yeah. Okay. And she said, "Oh my gosh, this is you." And and then it would take, that was when I was 15. And I think I got treatment around 21. Wow. That was actually helpful. I had some treatments that weren't so helpful, just because even back then, I don't think there was, I suppose, really what it was. Yeah.
And what do they believe triggers OCD? Is it hereditary, or is it something that triggers it within you as a baby or a young child that then makes you obsess and be compulsive about some of the things that you do? And also, there's a lot of questions I'm throwing at you here, so sorry. That's okay. Do you know what? Let's start with those ones because I got so many questions.
That's okay. No, I love it. I love to get the word out about it, because I do think it's a mysterious kind of, still to this day, a little bit mysterious, but the overwhelming consensus is that it's genetic, right? We know that if you have a relative with it, you're more likely to get it. Also environment can trigger it, right? There seems to be like most mental health issues, some people seem to be predisposed to certain ones. So it's likely I was predisposed to that. I said, my dad had his own sort of obsessive compulsive tendencies, and then anxieties run in my family and different things. So I was probably a ticking, I was probably ready to burst with it at some point. And then, different things in your life stressors, things like that can bring it about, sometimes trauma, but not always. A lot of people have OCD who don't have trauma. And then, there's a lot more work that needs to be done, but there are parts of your brain that aren't working correctly. I would venture to say that there's parts of your brain that involve memory that are not properly working. And the other thing I always tell people is it's that that part of your brain that says, there's a danger, the fight, flight, or freeze kind of thing. With OCD, it always feels like fight or flee. It always feels like a danger when you have these thoughts, but there's not. It's a false alarm. And so, yeah. So I think it's a mixture of a lot of things. I will say 2 of my kids have been diagnosed with it. So I definitely think, at least in my situation, it's very genetic. Having had it from such a young age, I clearly remember so many things that I now know were this disorder. So yeah, I think, and then in very rare cases, but it does happen, there's something called pandas, where it comes on almost overnight. And it happens with children typically, but it's a very, very, a quick onset of very severe OCD symptoms that are very different than before. And that's an immune response after a strep infection.
Oh, okay. Well, and that was the other thing. Well, the other thing I was going to ask is can you get OCD later on in life, right? So you go through your teenage years, your 20s, and then you get to 30, say, and can you then discover... So is it a discovery that you had OCD when you were younger, or is it that OCD can be triggered at an older age?
Yeah, my experience and what I know about it is most people are experience their first onset around 19, 20, the college years. A lot of those people do look back and see different patterns of behavior that just weren't maybe as severe before then, but not everyone. Some people genuinely just start having it about 19, 20. Pretty rare to get it after your 30s, but it can happen. But yeah, the majority of people will have symptoms in their early 20s, I would say.
Because I read somewhere that OCD is a form of PTSD. But not from what you're saying. Maybe this is the false information that's around.
Yeah, it's not. You can have both. And sometimes OCD is triggered by a traumatic event. And the other thing that recently I actually just wrote an article on was that OCD in and of itself can be a trauma. But the two don't necessarily go hand in hand, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Because I did wonder if it was due to trauma and things like that, because there's so many other things that can be triggered by traumatic experiences in your childhood that you bury or whatever, and that come out later on in life and things like that. And it's so, at the end of the day, mental illness is such a complex subject, and complex because we're complex human beings, right? Who knows what goes on in our heads sometimes?
Yeah,
I know I don't.
There's still a lot to find out, for sure.
Yeah. So how do you recognize it if you're a parent? How did you recognize it in your own children?
Yeah, for me it was pretty easy, to be honest. I mean, it just has a flavor about it, and when you've had it your whole life, you just see it. You just know it when you see it, and so it was. I'll give you some examples of what I tell parents who maybe wouldn't know what to look for is reassurance seeking. This is a big one with kids, checking in a lot with their parents and saying, like, is this okay? But to an excessive amount. So a lot of children I've worked with, and this was also a theme of mine as a kid, was an obsession around lying. So it was this idea of, if I lied, then I was a bad person. But then it became, everything I said could potentially be a lie. How do I know it's not a lie? And I see this in a lot of children. And so then the compulsions look a lot like, Mom, are you sure that that's true? Or, what do you think about this? Or am I okay? If I did accidentally lie, is that okay? Or adding words, I call them kind of filler words. So it might look like you asking your child, did you have a good day at school today? And they might say, yeah, I think, right? Because that's like a safety, like, okay, I didn't just lie because I said I think, because I'm not sure, which all goes back to that certainty, right? I can't ever feel certain.
Wow. Okay. And so
confessing is a big one.
Confessing.
For kids. Yep. So sort of like, oh, hey, I was at school today and, I stepped on Johnny's toes. Do you think I'm bad or I'm going to get in trouble? Right. Or, I might have said a bad word at school today, even though you didn't, but just in case, if I did, is that okay?
Is that okay? Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So they're saying that's the uncertainty side of things. And so as a child then, are they just doubting themselves all the time then? They're just going, I don't know, am I a bad person because, would I be a bad person because, and they're just constantly, that's that obsessive situation where they're just doubt. Oh my God, could something bad happen because of, wow, okay.
And not trusting their own judgments is a big sign, right? Like not trusting sort of their own reliance on something. The other thing is, well, I'll give you an example, I guess. When I was little, so when people have OCD, they have this hyper sense of responsibility. So it's sort of like, I have found, and this is just my Stacy's own research here, in all the people I've worked with, hundreds of people. So take it for that. But I think that the majority of people with OCD are very conscientious. They're very aware and sensitive, very hypersensitive, probably to a fault. And so what you'll often see is this intense fear around something that could hurt somebody they love or themselves. And then this intense sort of feeling of responsibility that I have to somehow correct it before it ever happens. And so the example I'll give is when I was little, 6, 7, 8, all the way up till honestly, probably I was a teenager, I would always have to say, whenever anybody left me to go anywhere, I would always have to say, wear your seatbelt. And my thinking was, if I didn't say it and they didn't wear their seatbelt and something bad happened, it's all my fault.
Because you didn't remind them, basically.
Because I didn't remind them. And so clearly that was my fault then, right? But I'm smiling as I say it, but at those moments, it was real. Like the idea that if I didn't say that, they would die and it would be all my fault. And it was just too much. And so there were times, but then I couldn't remember, did I actually say that or not? So I'd say it over and over and over again.
Oh, wow.
Or if they ignored me, like if they were just like, it's just Stacy, ignore her, then I couldn't be sure because they didn't respond.
Because you couldn't be sure that they'd heard you, which meant that they wouldn't maybe wear their seatbelt and die, and therefore it would be on you.
That would be all my fault.
You had to make them acknowledge and hear you. So then, wow. So
that's what I say to look for kids is like, they'll usually have this, like what you might see as just this quirky behavior or this sort of fixation on something sort of not important to you. But if it's reoccurring constantly and you're noticing that they get very anxious about it, there's a chance that would be something I would want to know about.
That's such a massive thing to put on yourself as a child, though. Like, such a massive anxiety as such to put somebody else's death, which is not your fault at the end of the day, but you think it is, on you. It's massive. Wow. Okay. So then, Christ, what do you do if you're listening to this, right? And you go, oh, that's my child, defo. What do you do? And I'm thinking, don't Google it at the, because there's so much like false stuff out there.
And there's some great stuff out there too, but yeah, there's a lot of misleading information for sure in the media and in the television and movies and that. I think the thing that most people get wrong about OCD is they only see compulsions. They don't see the reason that is often driving that, which is intrusive thoughts, such as, I'm responsible for the lives of all these people I love, right? It's not that they're just out there doing typically these compulsions, right? There's usually this agony behind it. And so, yeah. But what I say is get treatment. The earlier, the better. I mean, I tell people all the time and it's no one's fault. It just wasn't available or known about or talked about when I was a kid, at least not by anyone I knew. And so I always tell people if you could get help sooner, I think it just changes everything, right? Like you said.
How do you help somebody with OCD though? How do you
Sure,
is it that you have to learn coping mechanisms? Is it that you have to change the internal voice that you've got that's going on in your head? And I don't know if that's even possible. How do you get somebody help so that they can and I'm sure it's really hard to actually then not obsess and compulse, but at least do it less. Do you even do it less? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so it's an unpopular answer, but we know that the best treatment for OCD is exposure and response prevention, or ERP, which is a treatment that sort of gradually exposes you to your obsessive thoughts without neutralizing them. So we're changing your response to the thoughts, images, urges, because sometimes it's not just thoughts. It can be feelings. It can be this urge or this feeling like I have to do this. And then images is another one. You can have intrusive images. And so it's really exposing yourself to those without responding with compulsions, because when you respond with a compulsion, you're, without really even knowing it or meaning to, you're reinforcing the idea in your brain that there was an actual danger, and there never was. So we respond by not responding, typically, right? Like it's typically a non-engagement response. So the problem with that for people who suffer from OCD is it's highly anxiety provoking, because in your mind, you're not getting that relief that a compulsion would temporarily bring you. But over time, you're getting long-term relief. The more you don't engage in your compulsions, the smaller OCD becomes, because your brain starts to recognize I was never in danger, and it sort of self-corrects.
So like with you as a child saying, and don't forget to wear your seatbelt, right? The more and more you didn't actually say it, the more and more your brain goes, oh, that person didn't die, so it's not. And so therefore your brain then deals with that logic.
It's more, it allows the doubt. And the other piece when you're working with children is you really want the caregivers to be involved, because they unintentionally often engage in the OCD compulsions without knowing it. So in a
Wow.
perfect world, my parents would have learned the best way to interact with my OCD would have been to not. So in other words, whereas they would then say, yes, I heard you, or they would, answer me 500 times about it, they would maybe even go as far to say, nope, I'm not wearing it, right? Or I don't know if I'm going to wear it or not. We have a joke in my house because what we really want them to do is sit with the unknown. There's this magical thinking that's occurring, right? This idea that I can control the universe or things within it by what I say and do, which we know, that's not possible,
We
right?
can't do that.
It's so we want them to learn how to manage that stress and anxiety without relying on some external force in a sense. So my son, when he was little, and even to this day, to be honest, he has a lot of obsessive, intrusive thoughts about us being angry at him, right? Me and my husband are like the most passive people you'll ever meet. It's ridiculous. We're the cool family house. Everybody wants to hang out here because we're so laid back. But if you met my son, you would probably not think that because he's constantly, I don't even know how many times a day he'll say, are you mad? Are you mad? Today, so far, I've interacted with him not much because of school, but I bet 10 times I've been asked it. And so I will say, yeah. And I will say though, I don't know. And he'll get really upset, right? He doesn't like that.
Well, I can understand, right? Because you're going, I don't know, right? And he's going, well, I'd like a yes or a no, please.
Yeah. And I'll say, I don't know. And my other children will say, sit in the uncertainty, right? Because that's our thing. Now, I will say back before I started doing that, it would have been hundreds of times a day. So there's an improvement for sure.
Yeah.
But the idea is, so here's the other piece. And I know I'm throwing so much information out there because there's so much.
Oh, no, but it's good information.
Good. No, people with OCD also have very high distress intolerance, which just means they don't think they can handle certain feelings. So, anxiety or distress, they feel like I can't tolerate this. So a huge part of ERP treatment is getting them to see that, yes, you were highly anxious, you were stressed. And what happened, right? Was it what you feared? 99% of the time, it's not. And on that 1% that it might actually come true, okay, did you get through it? Were you able to deal with it? Yeah, because people can deal with things that, we can deal with anything, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. So over time, that's kind of in a nutshell how that works.
And so I don't want to even say this. So it's not that you get cured of OCD, but you learn to live with your obsessive compulsive disorder as such. It might be that instead of 500 times a day saying X, you only say it 10.
Yeah, most people believe it's chronic, right? It's a chronic condition. There are some that say, no, it can go away, but very few. I mean, the majority of people will say it's chronic, but it isn't always severe, right? It isn't always life altering. I've worked with a lot of therapists who say things like, you won't always meet criteria in terms of, we use the DSM-5 here, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health disorders. So you don't always meet the criteria, meaning it doesn't always impair your functioning to that degree. For me, it's been there constant, but there are many years it's way less. It's much quieter. And I would say from the time I was obviously younger to now, it's so much better, like night and day. So I think there's a lot of hope there. I think sometimes people get really sort of distressed about that. Oh, well, this is something I have to deal with for my life. And I always try to remind them, even if you have to deal with it your whole life, it's never the same as the beginning. It's never that scary. It gets easier and easier.
Yeah. And like, you do a job with this, right? So it's not as though
Yeah.
it's like people can go and still have a normal job and, you know, a normal life.
Absolutely.
They may need to have those conversations with people in their life, like the new partners or whatever, to say, hey, you might wonder why I do this. But, so, I mean, it shouldn't be debilitating.
I will say, oh, sorry.
No. Well, because I was thinking it shouldn't be debilitating, like where you just can't get on with anything. But I'm thinking that there would be times where maybe if heightened stress or whatever, it might like happen.
Sure. Yeah. The World Health Organization actually lists obsessive compulsive disorder in the top 10 most debilitating illnesses in the world.
Wow.
So that's not just mental health illness, that's physical illness. So it is very debilitating. And there are a lot of people who can't work or function in the way that they want to. But I would say that many people are able to with the right treatment, right? Or and sometimes that's medication. You know, I do ERP as my profession, right? That's what I specialize in because I believe in it and it works, and I do it in my own life and in my children's lives. But I'm also a big believer in medication if it's needed, and I take medication, and I'm open about that because I feel like that's important that I'm honest about that as well. For me, it will be a lifelong thing where I will take medication probably the rest of my life, and that's okay because my life is so much better.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I suppose then, like you say, with some things like autism and things like that, right? Medication is needed. ADHD, potentially, people, you know, when they're younger, take medication so they can at least get through school and deal with, you know, those situations and things like that. So, wow. I mean, it's full on. And like, is your husband OCD as well? Or so he...
No, he actually is the least anxious person I had ever met in my life, which is probably what drew me to him. He is a very just total opposite in that regards. But you know, all three of my kids are very anxious.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It must be a powerful gene.
Wow. Well,
It overtook his calmness.
And did you find it difficult having that conversation with him about OCD, or did he already know, or?
He knew only because like I've had it my entire life, and so when we met and everything, you know, we actually met when I was a teenager, so I was actually at my illest when I met him. So he I like to tell him he knew going in.
Wow, exactly.
So there's no like he had all the information going in, but he doesn't understand it, which is fascinating too, because I can explain it and I can try my best, but I think it's very difficult to understand unless you've really experienced it. It's just a tough one. It's a strange, it's sort of still a mysterious disorder. There's still things we don't fully know or understand.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for anyone who's got it, who needs to have that conversation or speak to work because maybe their OCD isn't as obvious, and they've got a job and stuff like that, but they're sort of going, I really need to speak to work because they need to be. How do you start that conversation? What's your advice to somebody to say, hey, this is go down this avenue?
Yeah, I mean,
it's so personal, I know, yeah, but
because it's so dependent on, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say this, it is still very stigmatized to have mental illness. And so you always, at least where I'm at, right? It's still very stigmatized. And I hate that that's the case. And in a perfect world, we would be able to tell all of our loved ones, tell our work, and we would be able to work from that standpoint, right? We would be able to have that understanding and have those, the ability to do that. Unfortunately, I don't know that that's possible for everyone. And so I think it really comes down to knowing when it's safe to talk about, and hopefully finding a job in which it is safe to talk about and you can, right? And really exploring the ways in which a job is good or isn't good for your mental health, because that's the biggie, right? And that's hard.
Did your parents tell your family? How did your family react to your diagnosis?
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. I mean, no, we didn't even really talk about it.
Okay.
I didn't mention this, but when I was about 10, I would say I was 10, I had this huge panic attack where, everything had led up to this, where my mom was really my go-to person that I confessed to and told all my thoughts to. And so she knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what. And my dad, he would just he wasn't around a lot because he worked a lot. He didn't really see it, but
that was the 80s, wasn't it? That was the 70s and 80s. Yeah. Dads weren't there, really.
Yeah.
They worked.
Yeah, he wasn't around much. Like, he was working hard and stuff, but he would kind of get irritated with me, and he would call it bad habits. And so I never would share with him those things, but so 10 years old is when I decided, okay, I have to conceal this because it's not good. And the reason was, we were getting ready to go ice skating. I think I've told this story before, but we were going to go ice skating because I lived on a lake and I love to ice skate. And I think our ice skates, I was having a friend over. I want to say our ice skates were stored in the garage where the gas cans were, of course. And I had gotten it in my head that this little girl was going to come ice skating and she was going to die because she was going to put on these gas
powered skates.
Yes. I was just like so worried about this, and she was going to die and it was going to be all my fault. And so I was like, I actually was having chest pains, and my parents were actually really worried about my heart because I had complained a lot about my heart, because my heart would like race and stuff. And so they had me laying down and stuff, and I was like, I don't know, I was just breathing funny and acting all kinds of upset. And I couldn't tell them why, because I knew it was weird. And at some point they said to me, Stacy, if you don't get it together, if this doesn't change, you're going to go see a psychiatrist. And I didn't even know what a psychiatrist was, but I knew it was bad and I knew it was scary. So I was like, okay, Stacy, you got to tuck this in because you're going to have to go to this doctor, and it's not a good thing. And so from then on, I just got really good at hiding it. And so,
and I suppose people do, though, don't they? If that's,
I think they do.
Like our age, they would get good at hiding it, wouldn't they? So, which is a shame, because it's not your fault. It's like needs to get sorted out so that they can have a life.
I think that. Yeah. And I think that's why I went so long without treatment and stuff. So when I was diagnosed, my mom was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. But even then, I didn't really find treatment, and nobody really talked about it.
No.
And yeah.
And it's quite,
we still didn't,
but it's quite funny because, and one of the reasons I wanted to get you on to talk about it is, like, people go, oh, I'm a bit OCD with that, right? And I go, oh, you're not really, because it's not. No. Like, and they go, oh, that's just my OCD kicking in, right? And it's mentioned so many times, and I even do it, right? So
I know. I think it's a habit.
Yeah, but it's like, there are certain things that I need to have a certain way and all of this stuff, but it's not OCD, right? It's just me and my quirkiness, right? So, that's why I wanted you on, because it can be debilitating for people, and we need to understand what it is and how we help people, and getting it out there and getting it talk. And thank you for, you coming on board and talking, and all the podcasts that you do, because you get it out there and you talk to people, because this is really happening, people, right? People like yourself and your kids really have these thoughts and these compulsions, and it's terrifying. It can be terrifying for you guys, right? And so anyone who's out there who's got a child who's going through this, or who is going through it themselves, there are things that can be done to help, ease the situation. I'm not going to say cure the situation, but ease the situation. And we just got to talk about these things. It's, it's nothing to be ashamed of.
It isn't. And honestly, I've scraped just the surface. There's so much more to it. There's so many ways in which it can manifest, and taboo ways in which nobody wants to talk about. That's the other piece of OCD, that nobody mentions. There's a lot of information if people are interested. No CD. We see people via telehealth, but we also have a free downloadable app if you go to treatmyocd.com. And there's lots of tools, lots of education, and a community of support within there. Really important that people know that they're not alone, because that's one of the biggest things with any mental health condition. People always feel alone. And then they're not. There's hundreds upon hundreds that just I see, let alone, the world.
And so, look, if people wanted to ask you questions, or, communicate with you, get help, get advice, whatever, like, where do they find you?
The best place is really my Instagram, stacyquick.undone. I try to respond to people as much as I can. But I am a therapist at OCD, and I primarily have shifted to doing more of a writing position. So I don't see as many people for therapy, but they offer ERP to children as young as, I believe it's 3 or 4. And they offer it all over the world. I've had people in the UK. I've had people in Australia. So it's out there. There is treatment. And I know we offer payment plans and things like that, and try to make it affordable. We accept a lot of insurances, that kind of thing. And I know treatment's life-changing. And so I always, whenever, especially a young kid comes in, I'm always just so hopeful, because I think if you can get it when they're young, you can really start to change some of those long-standing patterns.
Yeah. But this is the thing, right? It's like everything, if you can get it when they're young, then great. But it doesn't mean to say that treatment's not going to work if you're older as well, right? Because like you're living proof that, treatment's working, and and at least, you can then, there's other people that you can talk to who's basically, dealing with OCD. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So look, thank you so much for coming on here again. It's great talking to you and talking about this subject, because I think it's really important. We need to get it out there. It's not like, I stir my coffee a certain way and that's just my OCD, right? This is really, really things that are going on for people. I do have one final question for you, which is, what book would you recommend to my listeners, and why? And it can be anything. It doesn't have to be about OCD, but I'm building up this massive, great big list at the moment, and I don't know how I'm going to get through any of these books, but it's all good.
That's a good one. So a recent one I read that is is sort of OCD related that I recommend for more of a younger teenager kind of audience would be Turtles All the Way Down by John Green, because the main character in there has OCD. So that's a good one. And then I would say, and from an OCD self-help, this is really an old book, but I still have it to this day. It was gifted to me when I was 21, and it's an old book called Brain Lock. And that for me was life-changing. It does interweave ERP into it. It's not straight ERP, but it is a lot of that. I think there's so many, but those are off the top of my head.
2 for one.
That I think of.
2 for one.
Yeah, you got awesome. A 2-fer. Yeah. But I so appreciate you having me on, because I do think, this isn't something that is talked about enough, or at least not the reality.
Well, I
I
think people joke about it, and they don't actually understand really what it is. Yes. How it, what causes it, and how people can actually then get help for it. And I think in people joking about it, oh, that's just my OCD or whatever, right? It's a very throwaway comment that you don't think is actually going to affect anyone, for want of a better way of putting it. But actually it means that in making that throwaway comment, you're actually making people go underground with it a little bit more, because they don't want to go, oh, but I have got OCD and it means that I can't do X, Y, and Z.
I mean, it doesn't, so personally, it doesn't bother me, because I understand that people don't understand, but there are people who are very much like, no way. And I will say, and I know we're running out of time, but it is so severe sometimes. And that's the piece people miss. At one point I was washing, and I didn't get into this, but my face was burnt from washing with bleach. And I actually ended up having like some pre-cancer in my mouth later on in life, probably because of this. And so when people say, without knowing, well, I'm OCD because I like things neat. Well, I love things neat, whether that's OCD or just me, who knows? But that isn't what haunted me, right? It was this idea.
It's not that obsessive anxiety, mental conversation, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, like exactly what you say, right? I like things neat, right? Yeah. Well, there's, I have to have my desk clear, right? Like when I work, okay, I can't have things on my desk, but I don't.
It isn't like your whole family is going to be taken out by a bomb.
Exactly. No, do you know what I mean? So I don't have, yes, that's a compulsion of mine, right? But it's not linked with any obsessive thought or any, destructive thought that I'm sort of sitting. So it's just me being a bit of a neat freak in the fact that I like my desk clear and, but that's not OCD. It really isn't OCD in any stretch of the imagination. But that's where, and that's why I get people like yourselves on this show, right? Because I just want to take the stigma out of some of these things, and also to say to people, I know you might be joking out there, but you might be joking in front of somebody who actually is really suffering. And and I know we're in a society where, God, we have to watch everything we say now, which is like, but sometimes it's not about what we're saying. It's just actually, let's recognize these people as actually having, proper full on debilitating illness, basically, and try and help them, have empathy, and go from there. But oh my gosh, we got right down deep with that one. But look, thank you, Stacy. I've been trying to get you on here for such a long time, so it's all good. We're here now. We're here now. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's so important. No, it really is. Every little bit helps.
Yes. Well, look, I'll let you get on with your day now. And I'll get on with my day. We're in 2 different days, but I'm on Tuesday, you're on Monday, but it's all good.
Well, it was lovely to meet you, and anytime.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast and you would like to hear more, please hit subscribe wherever you like to hear podcasts. If you would like to support us further, share this episode with your friends and family. And finally, drop us a review on iTunes, as I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, and ideas. It all helps me to understand and produce awesome content you want to hear just like this. If you want to check out our past episodes, write to us, appear on the podcast, or for links, resources, and show notes, go to our website, www.strongsingleandhuman.com. We are also on all the usual social media platforms, Insta, Facey, and Twitter. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I hope to see you back here again soon. Be kind to yourself, and remember, no one is perfect. We're all just putting one foot in front of the other and doing our best. I'm Claire Martin, and you've been listening to the Strong, Single and Human podcast.